I'm Maria TSENU, and welcome to Catching Fraud and Valuation Miscalculation, where finance meets fraud prevention. I'm here to share the art and science behind fraud prevention, forensic accounting, and valuation, giving you innovative strategies to outsmart financial crime, manage risk effectively, and maximize your value ethically. Hello, this is the second podcast. My name is Maria TSENU. I'm a managing partner and founder of TSENU Consulting. And today I'm bringing Peter Wollmeringer, who is also a principal at TSENU Consulting. And he will join me discussing about what is the value of my brand that I just started the new company and what it is, how we can grow the value of that brand. And Peter has more than 30 years experience in valuation. We actually worked together during some period of time in New York. So I'm bringing back Peter into this conversation. So Peter, please.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah. Pleasure to be here. So
imagine like I am the business owner, or like I'm actually the business owner of TSENU and founded it, but like what is the value as of now for me and how I can grow it? So
let's first think about how you value something like a brand or a trade name. And usually, in this case, there's three methods that are generally used. One is a cost approach. Basically, that would be something you'd use very early and no income. A second would be a royalty method, which basically uses a royalty because a lot of times names are licensed and you can typically it's for a royalty rate as a percentage of revenues. You can calculate that, but you need to have an income stream for that. And then lastly could be an income approach. This would mean that basically the brand is the business, and you're going to use an excess earnings approach to value the brand, and there'll be excess or net of fees or charges for the use of the other assets in the business to come up with the value of the brand. That would have to be a very brand-centric kind of company. But for your company, so you've just started, you've spent a bunch of money to design it and create that and create some other
the logo and the colors and everything.
Color
so
schemes
hiring the branding company, the cost of it. So that's what is spent.
So essentially you would look at the spend. If that's what you are, if you're looking to kind of like set a baseline as you start the business, it's basically going to be really what you spent.
So this is now, right? How can I approach it in terms of maximization of my brand value and even what it is, the brand value, say in a year, in 2 years? Is it something that when I start generating enough revenue that I can value the business as a cutoff date, say in a year, and then take that brand value as a component of that larger value of the company, right? So can you just walk me through and the audience how it's usually done, right? Like what you strategize in a year, in 2 years, and maybe 5 years. So
it's hard to tell like how the company would perform, but let's just assume you have kind of your planned performance. Usually this is a forward-looking type analysis. The only thing you look at currently is the cost. But if you're looking at forward-looking, okay, you finished a year, you've shown, hey, I can do this, and we had, this much of time, a lot of time working on marketing and, less on working. So thinking that the second year is going to be more projects, still marketing, but it's not going to be the, as big because it's not going to be as much of an impact. So you will have maybe a much larger piece of revenue, and then you could kind of project that out. How do you think you're looking at over, let's say, 5 years? So with something like that, we could do some research and find a group of royalty rates and decide on a rate. We could also look at a tax related rule of thumb that we could come up with that would help us with the rate I mean, let's say we have rates between like 1% and 5%.
So with rule of thumb, and I'm going to pause a little
Yeah.
bit. What is the rule of thumb for valuation of branding
Well,
or any intangible
it really
asset?
just helps you with like 1% to 5%. Let's say that's the information you have. But what this rule of thumb does is it's basically tax related, and it looks at like historically that between someone's not going to license or pay for a piece of intellectual property like a brand if it's going to take up less or more than 25 to 33% of their EBIT or their earnings before interest and taxes. So it's just a baseline that, it could be less or more in reality, but it's a rule of thumb because that's where a lot of things, a lot of transactions have occurred. So I think that's an area where you could look at that as well and say, okay, well, based on what I'm doing, that says that I should consider maybe a 2% royalty rate. So I kind of look at this where I am after the first year and what my projection looks like. And you can make an estimate that way.
So, and again, like the value of intangible asset, and in this particular case, the brand, right, the trade name, this is the component of the entire business value. So I always need to think as a early startup business owner, and then once I progress, what is my value and how I maximize it, and what are the primary assets, intangible asset that helps me drive that value. Can you speak a little bit about the primary versus secondary intangible assets or asset to drive the value?
Yeah, I think anytime this is like in the valuation of mainly financial reporting space, there's kind of guidelines that talk about when you're looking at a whole company, say, usually in the context of a business combination. But so we don't have to consider that at this point, but we can think about what the basics are. So the primary asset is typically the most important asset, the asset that generates income or the most income, and then other assets are usually secondary assets that they're also part of the company. They're important assets as well, but you look to like what's generating really the revenue. So a lot of times you get companies that sell to customers. Let's say a software company, they sell products to customers.
Like Apple, like basically sells technology to computers,
Right.
Apple Pay, like whatever it is, right? Like the phone that most of us use, and then we have the brand name of that, right? So what it is it the technology or is it the
customer
brand?
So I think in this case, the brand is very big in Apple, but their customers will generate the revenue. The brand, it can be very tricky to think that through, but the customers that they have repeat customers for years and years and years. So you would value that over a long time going into the future using earnings. But the brand would be a component of the contributing assets, and then the net cash flows would go essentially to the customers. And then there's the brand and there's technology. So in a company like Apple, I mean, there's not that it's one of the most popular companies there is. So you could find other examples where it's more obvious that customers are going to be the primary asset.
Customer relationships,
right? Customer relationships, which is generally customers need to be repeating. You can't one-off customers really don't get included. And typically, if you look at say 5 years of customer sales, you're looking for the ones that are sticking around 5 years, and you can look at interim levels of attrition, how many drop out, but you look at it over each of the periods, how long they take, so you can get a proxy for what attrition is. But some companies, like with phones, I mean, I've had an iPhone since I think like the iPhone 3 or 4, and I keep buying them. I don't think I get a different kind of phone, but people switch. So sometimes they have attrition.
So for me, as a starting owner of the company, it's definitely like maximizing the value of the brand. But say in a year, if everything goes the way I anticipate, it has to be the balance between the customer relationships that I acquire, or would those customer relationships be not that strong and important? Can you walk me through how it's defined, including how much marketing and sales should be invested in, both sides of the equation?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, again, in a year, end of a year, and let's say now you have some customers, most likely they're going to be one-off project customers, and you may not come back. But you could also have customers, let's say, that might be, say, a law firm that might have multiple projects for you over a period of time. And ideally, that's the best kind of case scenario, for the kind of work that we do, finding a client that has, repetitive business, and lawyers have repetitive, all sorts of different types of business. So let's say you had some of those, and you could see that you're going to get more. You could look at that. You could start seeing a transition into the fact that now there's customer assets that are driving revenue, and the name is probably picking up as well, because it should have a piece of that. The way you market it and attractive firms. So the name is only going to work if the work you do is really good. That's what's going to be the lasting impression. So if the work isn't good in the first, but with, say, this one particular law firm, they're not going to come back. But if it's great, then they're going to keep using you, and that's how you build. That's where the brand will build, and the customer assets will build also.
So imagine if I would have been selling shoes as an alternative to a Nike shoe, right? Just really not branded.
Not Nike.
Not Nike. Anything but Nike. So in that case, like in a year time, my brand strength versus the consulting firm and shoes production, what should I be as a business owner focusing on to maximize the value of that business and brand?
I think the way you maximize it is growing the business, growing the cash flows, getting to profit. That's how the models work generally. If you can't sell anything but have a great brand, it's probably ultimately going to fail. So, all the effort you can put in now, and if the business fails, that the brands.
So just to stress on that, does not matter how much you focus on the actual brand value. The core is the revenues and how much you sell. This is the most
from
important.
From
the valuation, right?
I mean, in reality, outside of the theoretical basis of valuation, the brand may have a tremendous amount of value if you build it the right way.
Okay.
And it may not have to do with the revenue, maybe with other intangible aspects. It's not cut and dried. In reality, in valuation, we would look at a forecast for a company and figure out a royalty rate and value those after-tax cash flows from the royalty rate, and value other assets as well. It just varies, and I think it's a hard question to answer. I think the best thing is grow the business. Don't sit there and think always about the brand. Build it. Keep marketing it. Go to events, sponsor events if you can do that. But the brand has to be. Try to make it a big part of what you're selling. It's on the letters. It's in a report, and it just becomes known. But it's only going to be really worth anything if the company's worth something. And the company's only worth something if you're generating cash flows.
This is so true, and it's very interesting. I get a lot of questions from pre-revenue pharma or medical devices or biotech companies. What is the value of our brand or our intangible asset, right? And that's the hardest question to answer, right? When you don't really know what the revenue will be, you don't have historical information, so you cannot really apply income approach. And technically, the company it's an internal value. I think we need to stress that unless the company goes through the actual transaction and you do the purchase price allocation, right, there is kind of no value of that intangible asset, right?
Right, it wouldn't be on their books.
On the books, it's hypothetical only to stress, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, companies don't value their own brand and put it on. You need to have a triggering event, which would be a transaction being acquired, or maybe some there could be some way of doing a joint venture where it's possible the name could be valued, but I'm not positive about that. But I think you're right. You have something like life sciences. Companies have names, but they're years away from a product, and sometimes products have names that are very memorable, and some are words you can't even pronounce, but they give them maybe a more pronounceable name. That's what they're going to market. They're really not marketing a company. So you could say, okay, it's a Johnson & Johnson drug or something like that. Johnson & Johnson is not the primary name that they're using. They're trying to push the name of a particular drug. And those drugs become, like Kleenex, they become ubiquitous, once they're out. But again, it's difficult to try to value a trade name for a product that hasn't even been finished developing and is not in the market and has a very high chance of not ever getting to the market. So, yeah, generally you wouldn't value that.
So again, speaking about definitions, I think it's important to highlight the value of the brand versus in the actual value for valuation purposes versus equity value, right? How much you build that equity by growing and investing in the brand, but the brand name does not really change that much, again, if it's then on the books, right?
I mean, thinking about brand equity, I think that's just the building of the brand. The way I would interpret that's evidence that you've built the brand over time, that it's recognizable. You're a player in the space that you're in, and people know who you are. You present at meetings, things like that. You've built the brand in that way, but the value of the brand and the building of the brand really comes. Unfortunately, you have to be successful with the business to get a valuation like that. I mean, you would just even whether it's official valuation or you're just looking at the business and saying, I think the brand has really been built up. There's a lot to it, and it's a component of what the whole company is. If you look at the company's intangible assets, in a year or 2 years ago, I have a brand, I have a group of customers that always work, I have people that I work with. Those three things are the real components of a company.
Yeah, because there is sometimes the perception of like, I will invest like enough into marketing, into sales, into this and that, and then voila, my brand value, actual value changes tremendously, right? That's really not true from the valuation professional with many, many years of experience, right?
It changes with how you grow.
How you grow. True.
Yeah.
Are you ready to protect your business from financial risk and fraud? My independent and global firm, TSENU Consulting, specializes in forensics, investigations, valuations, and litigation consulting. My mission is to help you identify and mitigate risks while maximizing your company's value. Whether you're a corporate executive, investor, or law firm, TSENU's expert approach provides rigorous, white-gloved deliverables tailored to your unique needs. With a strategic and global presence, TSENU Consulting is ready to become your trusted advisor. TSENU Consulting, where protecting value and preventing fraud is not just our business, it's our passion. Go to www.tsenu.global. So we mentioned the Nike, right? The brand. Can you just elaborate a little bit about the situation with Nike, the changes in brand perception, and kind of like exactly the same, what is the value? What's the maximum?
From all time?
From all time, right? It would be interesting.
It's
and maybe your experience personal with shoes as well when you were
I remember being in
a couple of years younger
and a counselor having these waffle running shoes with Nike, and they're very cool. They're very different than anything I'd ever seen. And not long after that, everyone seemed to be starting to wear Nike shoes, and I had to. Me and I'm sure other friends of mine had to convince our parents to up the ante and buy us Nike shoes. I remember the first one I got was a white with red striped Nike Corsair, and I had multiple of those. Great shoes, super comfortable, way more comfortable than the others, let's say, Ked Sneakers, that maybe that's what I was wearing before. But, Nike's built that from a track shoe, initially, years ago into the 70s, and turned themselves into, one of the largest, shoe companies there is, with all, shoes that work for different purposes. They were, I believe at some point they were making ice skates, they make uniforms, all sorts of clothing, shoes for many different sports. It's an amazing turn, and there's so many followers after that. There really weren't that. I mean, I think companies that might have been older than them. Let's say Adidas is a company that's been around, and Puma. I think they preceded them. I think they go further back, but they're all kind of like in the same group. And then newer companies came up, or Converse, which is an older brand. Was another one out there, but all they made generally, I think, was canvas shoes. But over that time, they really built up. The swoosh was very noticeable. Lots of companies have something. The swoosh became, they just made it big, and they had great advertising, in their marketing efforts. That Go Do It. I think what was that? Is there?
Just Do It.
Just Do It. Right?
Yes.
Just Do It. Yeah, can't remember their branding, but yeah, they really did a lot more. You don't see advertising for Reebok or New Balance or Adidas really very much, but you still see a lot of Nike.
So if you had to value the brand and such as Nike, initially when you just bought your first shoes many years ago, that was from cost approach to some sort of hybrid, right? Potentially market.
They were specifically used in the track space, and then expanded out of that into just more casual sneakers, and then focused on things like basketball and running. As those activities got more popular. So again, valuing the whole company, what's the value? They're publicly traded, so you kind of have a view of what the whole company's worth, and then trying to break up what their cash flows are. So if I was working with them, they would kind of share where they're going and what their revenues are. The brand would be a massive value, because you probably have a pretty high royalty rate, because here you would also, I'm thinking more current day, they probably have licenses. In some cases, they maybe license the brand out. I'm not sure, but maybe they have in some product. Like another company might be making a certain line of clothing or something like that. They were making cycling clothing at some point too. That I actually had a piece of that once. You would see, the significant amount of revenue, a high royalty rate. For a company like that, it's a store. It's not really a subscription. I don't know that they would necessarily value customers. Maybe you'd look at customers as like if they're selling to teams, like leagues or something like that. Like I think or
direct to businesses, right? To resell, it could be potentially.
Well, I'm sorry. That's right. It's the stores. It's the retail stores, which are their customers.
No, but it's very interesting. This is kind of like that discussion and thought process, which usually goes in the brainstorming exercise. And again, when you mentioned the royalty rate several times, I just want to get back a little bit to the basics. The royalty rate of a hypothetical licensing out, right? So there will be licensee, licensor, hypothetical transaction.
I have this name. If I didn't have this name, I might have to pay 10% per dollar to license it from a third party.
Right.
That's what that is arguing. It's like without the name, I would have to pay this amount. Which by default becomes what the value is.
Which is very interesting, how much that value of the company be without the Nike swoosh and Nike. Just take that out. That's simple. The equation, right? You take that out, or like you take another brand, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, right?
Or you could look at, for example, at Pepsi and Coca-Cola more, when they changed their formula one year, and I don't know all the statistics. I remember they changed to New Coke, and I know I didn't like it, so I stopped drinking it. And I think that was widespread, and suddenly they had to bring back the old formula.
So that's the formula, right? And
well, that wouldn't be a trade name. That would be proprietary technology. They never patented it because someone could unwind it, and it limits its life. But it's the secret formula, and they altered the secret formula, and it didn't go over well, and they had to go back to the original formula. And that was, if you looked at if brand could be something that went every day with the stock price, you would see it go down because of that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a negative.
So it's
negative
like, there's the correlation, it's like affected. And again, there's like a 100% value, and then you have to kind of slice it, right? It's just hypothetical, right?
Yeah. If you could see something like that on a daily basis, when they came out with that and it failed, that's a risky thing to do. Suddenly change something that's tied to your brand, your top selling product, and change the formula, and now it tastes different.
So what is interesting is that there are companies, including Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and then Mars Inc. Incorporated, which produces some different types of chocolate bars. But then nobody knows that they have different divisions of different types of products. They are sold under different brand names. So there's a company, the corporation name, there is a brand name. So it's like a trademarks, brand names. There's the entire universe of that.
For big companies like conglomerates have a lot. Yeah, I think like PepsiCo is a company that mostly was a beverage company, and I think they bought Frito-Lay, so they have a big food company, but you don't really see them directly advertised together. Usually they have their own separate branding for those kinds of products. There's lots of companies that you could look at that have things. So let's think of a car company. I worked on a bankruptcy when the last bankruptcy that Chrysler was in I think 2009. They were bought by Fiat, so you have to do evaluation of all the assets that they had. So the biggest assets they had, I think, were plant assets, but they had brands, the Chrysler brand, they had the Jeep brand, the Ram and Dodge brands. So I think those are the main ones that we looked at. And everyone can recognize those brands over time, but Chrysler was also the name of the company at the time. But the automobile industry, wasn't doing well. Chrysler really not one of the big companies out there. Jeep, that's very popular if you think about it, and the Ram trucks have since then have become much more popular over time, and those are really the dominating brands of the company now, which is now has a new name, Stellantis. But I think there's just differences in how companies work.
So when you will value the types of brands within the large organization, how will you approach it? Will you just strategize and apply different royalty rates, right, depending on the sub-market category, right? Or you will go again like slice and dice from the top? Can you just walk a little bit us about that?
I think you would look at basically let's say you had 4 brands you were looking at, sub-brands to the corporate name. You would probably look at what is the most popular, what can you tie most revenue to? And probably if you had a range, let's say of, 3 or 2 to 5% based on research you're doing, you'd use the higher one. The highest one you might use would be on the larger revenue, the larger growth brands versus say some of the brands that are still popular but just aren't of the same size. You could cut them, they would have less, most likely. But it also depends on how they might be growing. They could be newer and have more prospects and are growing, like let's say a new electric car or something like that, and that's got a new brand and that's growing rapidly. And maybe that gets, maybe not initially, but let's say you're 7 years in and they're doing very well. Maybe that gets a higher brand because it may be growing faster. But I think there's just a lot of factors that you try to look at. Those are fairly general. The size, growth rate, those would be 2 big ones. They're 2 big ones in any element of value.
So in terms of the geography of brand presence, does that matter? Like imagine there's some brands with massive presence and like most of the global markets, right? And there's some local brands. So I would assume because of the risk factor, right? Like how do you evaluate the differences in the brand value?
I mean, you could could value it all as one thing on a consolidated basis, but you probably need to look at the underlying. So if there's minor presences in some place, you probably don't have to go into really deep. But if you have, a major presence in, a bunch of countries in Europe, let's say, and Asia, you would probably have to break it down because it could be different economics. There could just be different factors going on in those markets versus say, your home market.
Okay.
So I think that's going to be a facts and circumstances type decision with how much you break it down. I know I've worked on another bankruptcy. This was with Toys R Us, which is a huge brand, probably the biggest brand in toys. And they had owned.
I remember that.
And they had owned FAO Schwartz, and FAO Schwartz was sold, I think, prior to them going bankrupt. And they ultimately they dissolved. We were valuing, but they had brands all over they had presence all over the world, which we didn't really have to track so much. But they had some things that were separately owned. They were licensed, so we had to look at those differently. And ultimately in the bankruptcy, they liquidated everything, and ultimately someone bought the rights to the brand, and now there's like 200. I think I looked at it the other day, and there's maybe like 130 stores, but they're embedded small little stores in like airports and places like that.
I was curious.
Totally different than what they were.
Somewhere, even I don't remember, in one of the largest malls, I also noticed like a really tiny Toys R Us, and I'm like, what is that? And it's to that point that you touched upon at the beginning, it could be zero revenue, right? But the brand value.
They brought the brand back. Well, these people got that brand and said, we can do something different with it. We can make it better. And what they've done so far, they're reaching the customer in a totally different way than Toys R Us prior did. How much revenue they're going to generate from that, I don't know. But think of how many people get stuck in airports and go shopping in the stores, buying toys for somebody. It's another great opportunity for those locations. So that's what they're doing now. And I saw the other day in Manhattan a gigantic Toys R Us over by Rock Center. I did not know it was there, and it's huge. It keeps going on and on. It's almost like half of the block. So not quite what it was when I was little, but it's back, which is nice.
So, Peter, is there anything that we didn't discuss about the brand valuation, about something that I should be considering, like before we wrap up?
I don't think so, really. I mean, conceptually, brand is a function of how you grow the company, and the company grows sometimes related to how you brand it, how you're connecting your brand to what you're offering, high quality service. This is what we're all about. And if you can connect all those things together, it can be worth a lot.
To just summarize, I guess we started with the idea that any brand is the concept of the cost approach. And again, in valuation, 3 approaches: cost approach, day one, cost approach, market approach, income approach. The last 2, they're not applicable because there is still no revenue, not enough revenue. There's still no market. You can compare it technically, but again, you need revenue to start with, right? Or some profitability, right?
You can still project it, but I mean, day one, even you probably wouldn't buy into forecasts on day one. So I think you need to have some track record, and then you could start considering other approaches, like say royalty, that you can project out a period of time that based on your first year. And it's not something that you have to look at, but that's something that's interesting, and seeing how your brand is fitting in the overall business. You can do that kind of analysis.
Is there any way to not do the entire full project of, value the business and then allocate the intangible assets such as the brand name, but just do it constantly, say quarterly or once in half a year or a year for myself to build that model, right? Would that be something sort of an internal project, or
that would be?
It's kind of rough estimate,
you don't need the other pieces. You kind of need to get an understanding of what the total cost of capital is for the company, because you have to discount the cash flows.
Which will change, right?
It could change for economic reasons. It could change for risk reasons. But that's going to be a key factor to building something like that. But yeah, you could build a model and you can modify it every month. You could change growth rates and things like that. And you could do a range of discount rates and things just if you're not certain as to where you stand.
So it won't be on the books, just to be clear, but it will give me the peace of mind, right? Theoretically, how it changes, and then I can see the dynamic, right? And as you mentioned, if there's certain changes in the environment and the economy, or my risk profile changes, right, as a company, then it is important to see like which direction at least it goes, right? The brand value. Okay.
I think that's true.
Well, thank you very much for listening. We had Peter Wollmeringer with, as I mentioned, more than 35 years of valuation experience from every angle, including, you mentioned restructuring, purchase price allocations, impairment analysis, private equity, you name it. And I hope to bring Peter again later.
Sounds good. Happily come back.
Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe. Reviews are very helpful. If you'd like to get in touch with me, go to www.tsenu.global and book a call today.